Welcome to the latest edition of On and Up Coaching's Book Club podcast. This week, we are going to look at Switch by the Heath brothers, which is subtitled, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Delighted to be joined once again by Rachel, Rossana, and Beth. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Always good to have you on. Just a reminder that these are books that have influenced the coaching philosophy of On and Up Coaching. And I think this one is particularly important because this relates to how do you manage change well, which I think is kind of where the On and Up Coaching business actually got going in looking at how you manage change. This book was very influential in thinking about how to do it well. So I'm going to share, as usual, some things about the book, just as a kind of place marker, and then we'll get into the discussion. So book was originally published in 2010. I find it one of the most accessible books that I've come across around change because it doesn't just deal with the mechanics of change management. It also deals with the emotion, which usually can often get in the way of changing things. I couldn't find specific sales for Switch, but they've sold over 3 million books. And I think their model has a number of really attractive things to it, and themes that we talked about before about aligning our rational brain, our emotional brain to help change succeed. And they have these labels, which I'm sure we'll touch on, called the rider, which is the rational mind, and the elephant. It's funny how many names the amygdala gets called, but I guess in this book, it's the elephant. One big idea, amongst the many they have, is using bright spots to enable change, and I'm sure we'll touch on what that means. I also think their idea of writing a destination postcard, although that may lose a certain generation. I don't know if anyone sends postcards anymore, but the idea is you write a postcard from the place where everything has worked, and you're writing it from the future back to yourself. And they also have this notion of shaping the path, about kind of really being able to understand how do I get from where I am now to whatever that destination postcard tells me. They've got a lot of examples in here in the book. I'm sure we'll touch on many of them. I think it's fair to say they've had a lot of success in helping organizations and individuals make major changes in a successful way. So that's kind of the upfront summary. I'll stop sharing. Oh, well, let's get started. So raise your hand if you want to get going first. But the first question is, what are the ideas or approaches that resonate with you the most about Switch? Should I pick on someone? Oh, Beth. Okay.
So, the imagery of the rider and the elephant, and then, the path, laying the path in order to follow and make it easy to make the changes. I thought it was good, instead of like talking about how the brain works, but talking about how the rider is the one that's the rational self and the elephant is the emotional self. And I really, what resonated with me were the different stories they told along the way. And how the rider has to like plan the direction, and then motivate the elephant. I thought that really resonated with me, and I'm trying to implement some of these ideas into my life since. So
that's awesome. The one of the abiding images they talk about is where the rider's trying to pull so hard that the elephant's just going around in circles, which I think is a really effective way of communicating a lot of things in one go. So
I like to say that it was interesting to me when they mentioned the positive. You can move the elephant in both positive and negative energy, with positive or negative energy. And that really stood with me because I guess the hardest change to make in life is try to use the positive energy to make changes that will last for a long time. So that really stood with me. So I wanted to share that.
That's interesting as well. The imagery for me it really had multiple meanings. And I think about the rational brain and the emotional brain is not too dissimilar to being a parent and trying to get children or your family to do something. So the thinking versus the emotional. But what I kind of giggle about is they talked about, a partially finished journey is better than starting one from scratch. And times when I'm working on projects where we try to tackle something very big, in fact, bigger than most people can imagine, it becomes almost like a defeatist task for them. So I'll often say, this is like breaking down the fundamental questions. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So I thought it was kind of interesting that I'm thinking about eating the emotional self of me. But yeah, so it very much is probably taught marketing path, makes it much more easier than starting off from scratch.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a fantastic example actually that they use of there's a bunch of research behind a lot of the things that they talk about, but the one where they give people cards for the car wash, and basically you have to collect 8 to get a car wash, but many more people turn them in when they're already 2 stamped on the $10 card. Well, you would think, well, you wouldn't think, because we've studied this with some of the Kahneman work, right? How easy it is to kind of trick our kind of thinking into maybe doing things that we might not if it's not presented in the right way.
Yes. I must say I've fallen for that one with the extra punches. I never realized that was drawing me in. With the car wash, with the coffees.
Yeah, it was the coffees for me, actually. I must dig out my my Rehoboth Cafe coffee coupon thing, which has got like pre-stamped and none of mine. Anyway, yes, I detour. One of the other links I can make back to something else we've talked about previously in a previous episode was they talk very much about trying to instill or help people to develop a growth mindset. So they talk about this in the connection with the if you remember the parrot story, where the native parrot to St. Lucia was almost extinct, and the guy who kind of basically ran the campaign to bring the parrot back, essentially what he did was help people think about the kind of uniqueness and the opportunity to present St. Lucia in a different light, which links very much back to what we talked about when we looked at the Carol Dweck book.
Yes.
So
and he made it the mascot of country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite an important piece of the story. Yes. Thank you. So, so there's probably a few other things to touch on, but before I kind of dive off into those, is there anything that surprised you about the ideas that they proposed, and maybe the question about the approach that they're promoting? Should we go in a different order?
To me, it was one of the lessons that they have is like get your inner elephant gained by evoking a powerful emotional response. And again, that resonates to either the positive of the negative energy that you choose to move your emotional being and actually make it change. The part that resonated to me was making positive, small changes to make it lasting. For those who know me personally, I'm very impatient. My husband saying, Rossana, you're either in or nothing, you're one it all or nothing, like all the extremes. And that really resonated to me that perhaps I should be more intentional when it comes to moving little by little towards a target. So that's with the growing. I love all the books that you, Paul, have suggested here in your podcast, and the ones that we've been talking, for those who haven't checked out the podcast. But it's interesting. I feel like this book has really ignite that a slow process of dramatic change in that aspect, to do a little bit at a time. I'm right now decluttering my house, and I haven't done it for years. and it's overwhelming. And this might be a silly example, but like it can go from as little as decluttering your house to as big as the project that Rachel was mentioning a few minutes ago. You know, it's one step at a time, you know.
Yeah.
So
with decluttering, you need to find your equivalent of the car wash coupons, right? What's the...
yes.
And thank you for the praise about the books. I do think there's a reason that they're kind of impactful.
Yes.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I was struck with when they talked about changing your identity, and they gave the example of the manufacturing plant in Brazil, where they called everyone inventors, and it really magnified their ability to turn and produce. And at first, I was really surprised by that. But the truth is that so many of these steps are about visualizing something you want to be, and then you can become that. So it made sense at the end of the day. And it never dawned on me about changing your identity just by calling something or someone different. I thought it was very interesting. It was very thought-provoking, as well as what else can you do that goes beyond just a business. You know, what can you do within a home, and what are the different identities you can assign that could affect whatever kind of output. So I thought it was very thought-provoking and made me thinking about what different approaches you could use that in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that also, I think they talk about this, it needs to be real as well. So it can't be a, you know, we're going to call everyone a professor kind of thing when, you know, most of us are learning. But I think in that case, what they were looking for were people who would be inventive. So
yeah,
good.
There are a lot of workshops that I've gone to, and when I go back and think about them, oftentimes with workshops, they spend the first 10 minutes kind of decluttering your brain and creating this sort of open environment to be creative, and then they go into the creative exercises. So in many ways, by declaring who you are or creating a new identity is sort of declaring that those cobwebs and creating an opportunity where you can be more creative. So it was very interesting.
Cool.
So what I would question from the book, which I guess it made me feel uncomfortable, was it was like creating your path, on the path, you know, choosing or shaping your path, where they said that you should hang out with people that have the traits that you're trying to change to.
Yeah.
And I was a little uncomfortable with that. I don't know. I just think that variety is the spice of life, and it might be a little too limiting, that idea. I see where they're coming from, but for some reason it made me uncomfortable.
Yeah. You can see that, but that is one of the pieces the way they pulled on quite a few people's research, right? Of how you kind of fall in and model behaviors that are kind of acceptable in the kind of social group that you belong to.
True. I mean, I guess maybe I need to be more, I need to like take that to heart and actually implement it more in my life, I guess. But it just said to make me feel a little strange.
It reminded me of a saying, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, and I'm speaking about different cultural attitude and approaches with Paul before, but it reminded me of, you know, your mom saying, tell me who your friends are and I will tell you who you are.
Exactly.
You know? So it is fascinating to the he puts this, they both put this on their book, like try to imitate or try to surround yourself with the people that you kind of want to be, perhaps. But
right.
All I can think of is, you know, when Rachel was talking about changing your identity, all I was thinking is like, how can you put your identity in a resume to get the career you want? And when you, Beth, are talking about like the people that you want to surround with, all I'm thinking is for those people who want to progress in their career, those are two tips to kind of put in practice.
True.
So I had a similar experience when I was thinking about it, because when I think they were calling it like rally the herd. When it was associated with a goal, I understand and I can identify with that. So you want to exercise more, you'll tend to be around people who move more and you'll move more. Or, you know, a drug addict who comes out of a program needs to change their friends. So when it comes to the specific goal, I get that. But when it comes to being diverse and being open-minded, I can see how it's taken in the other way. But when I first was thinking about it, I was thinking, not everyone can be the person that everyone else wants to be. So who gets left out in this process of selection? And that's what I was thinking about, is who gets left out because they don't fit someone's goal at the time.
Right.
Wow. So I guess on the positive side, I think rally the herd is exactly what they call the phenomenon about behavior being contagious and getting people to support you. I guess if you're kind of going to deal with the negative, I think being aware that kind of if you are trying to change something or you're trying to be part of something different, who you surround yourself with and who you get to support you along the way is very, very important.
Yeah.
But our goals can be to think more diverse, to appreciate other cultures. We could have a lot of goals that have nothing to do with one specific tangible in terms of a career. It can be about inner growth. So I think everyone has gifts, and as more you can see from other people's gifts, then people aren't getting left out. But that was my first protective mother mode, is I wanted to protect the person who could get left behind.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to go kind of around one more time. A couple of thoughts I did want to leave with, but before we do that, for people listening to this who may not have read the book, what's the one thing you'd want them to know? And it could be, here's some things you want to share with your kids. It could be things you might want to apply in your work or in your community, or something you just might do differently. And I know Beth already mentioned something she was trying to do differently. So maybe I'll start with you, Beth.
Well, I think that I took a lot from that Brazilian car manufacturer story as well, Rachel. And it made me realize that, the motivating, because we want to motivate, right? That's the elephant. You want to motivate the elephant. And by making sure that you give a title when it comes to a position or in the workplace. This is where I would take it to the office. You always want to make sure that you give them a title that will allow them to grow. And I think that, like, applying it to somebody who is like in the janitorial services, if you call them like if you call them like a housekeeper versus calling them a janitorial technician, I think that really does change the way the person is motivated. And so that's what I would like, someone to know, is like, that was an interesting aspect of this book.
I've seen quite a few examples actually in some of the big changes I've been involved in where people were determined to put certain labels on roles, and it always felt, and this provided the evidence, that you were limiting what people were ever going to do in those roles.
Right.
Junior assistant, blah blah blah, is like, okay, I don't do anything without being told.
Right.
Yeah. So who's next? What's the one thing you'd want to share with people who may not have read the book?
I'll go next. Have a destination postcard, I thought was.
Oh, Rachel, you stole mine.
But I do think it's the most universal, because it's about visualize where you want to go, and then the journey becomes easier to get there. So for me, that is simple in terms of professional, in terms of personal. It's really about visualize what you want, and so then you can experience yourself going there. But the thing that I thought was probably the most thought-provoking, because that's universal for me, was finding the bright spots. And I really liked the example they gave around the community in Vietnam, and discovering that the addition of protein really increased, the health of the children significantly. So I thought that was something we really haven't explored very much, but I think would be a really helpful thing to share with someone who hasn't read the book yet.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would say is make it as easy as possible. Those changes that you want to do, make it as easy as possible, so you don't even have to think about it until it's a lasting result of whatever that change you're seeking to have. That the thing that it reminds me of is that this You know that Albert Einstein used to wear the same clothes because it requires less energy, and he wanted to consume that energy on something way more interesting. So it kind of, that was the picture in my head when I was reading that part. So making a small changes. And again, just what Rachel said, thinking about that postcard, this little bitty thing that I'm doing today eventually is going to get me to that image in my postcard, that change that I want to have. You know, sometimes we think that in order to make it a change that will change your life in a drastic way, you just have to do a whole turn, you know, and take things very drastically. So it's proven that one step at a time, total steps, but firm steps are the key to a successful change.
And one thing that I've implemented this week is getting onto my Peloton for 5 minutes and saying to myself, oh, I'll just get on for 5 minutes. And then I get on for 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, I can do 15. And that I got from the book.
Yeah.
That is terrific. That's terrific. One thing just listening to you made me realize is how visual the book is, actually, with the destination postcard and the ride of the elephant, the bright spots. I think the couple of small things I just kind of leave with as well that really felt kind of illustrated sort of the whole notion of small steps in the change, with the two things he talked about in terms of shaping the path, and again another great image. They talked about tweaking plate sizes to help people with calorie intake, and it's just like that. That's like the Einstein's clothes thing. That's not something you need to think about, right? It's like, what size plate should I use? I'm just going to use smaller plates to help me with calorie intake. And then the final one, this is something, and come back to the book, I'd completely forgotten, where they talk about building habits by checklisting things. So they had this kind of, I don't know if you sort of remember the bit about ICU line infections were a problem at this particular hospital. And they simply created a checklist of the best practice, and then line infections kind of reduced significantly.
Or the pilot's checklist.
Yes. Another good example. Yeah. So some wonderful stuff in this book. Thank you for going on this journey with me. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Rossana. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Rachel. I wish I could tell you what next week's book is, but I haven't got to that yet. Anyway, this was Switch by the Heath brothers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.